It can be quiet at the top of a mountain. It's a sort of quiet that you don't even really notice. For me, that's what I enjoy the most. Just silence. I spend so much time cramped up in some dingy corner shop watching a trickle of people come in just to buy tobacco, beans or booze, that standing there with my arms open feels like the greatest thing in the world. I guess, along with that, there really isn't much else to do around here, so hiking's just about the only hobby I have. It's been months since I last went up there though. You find the weirdest things hanging around the woods, and there have been rumours of a big cat up there since I was a kid. I once saw an eyeball. No explanation, no context, just an eye lying in the middle of the track. At the time, I figured it was a sheep's eye, but it didn't much look like one. Last time I went up, the weather turned lousy halfway there. It started with a drop in temperature, and it was like the sun had been put on a dimmer. One by one, I felt icy little pricks of water stab at my skin, and just as the first gust of wind started tugging at my coat, I realized it was time to turn back home. Before I turned 100 feet, the whole sky opened up and I had to stumble my way home through a wall of water, flinching at the growing peals of thunder behind me. Anyway, I got partway down when I saw something sticking out of the dirt. I'd come off a muddy path onto a gravel lane used by farmers to reach their flocks up in the hills, and it would have been easy to miss the little bit of black plastic, except something about it looked odd. I don't know how the brain does it, but somehow, even through all the rain, and with it mostly buried in muck, I recognized it as a USB stick, even from quite a distance. I took it, scraped it off, and stared at the brandless, all-black plastic drive, wondering how the hell it had ended up halfway down a mountain. It didn't have a size, but I hoped it would be big. A big enough USB stick could go for some cash online, and if not, I could find some use for it myself. And, of course, there was a kind of voyeurism to find as well. I mean, I was curious as to what was on it, just like anyone else would be. I hoped to God I wouldn't plug it in and find it chock full of nasty porn or snuff films. It certainly seemed like someone had gone to great lengths to get rid of it, but that didn't deter me from wanting to see what was in it anyway. Nearby, lightning flashed, and the thunder was so deafening I cried out. I took stock of my surroundings and suddenly realized it wasn't very smart to be stood out in the open holding a piece of wet metal. So I took the stick away and focused on hauling ass back home. By the time I stumbled up the mouldy stairway that led to my flat, I'd forgotten all about the USB stick and just fell down on my sofa, watching whatever crap was on at the time. It wasn't until a few hours later, when I was peeling my damp jeans off my legs, one at a time, that I felt the little stick in my back pocket. I gave it a quick clean and plugged it into my laptop, finding myself surprised when it actually worked. It took a fair amount of clicking and whirring, but eventually, a new Explorer window popped open and I found new folders. One or two were filled with some messed up hash files I couldn't open, but one folder was called WritCoin and had a .exe with the same name. The program took up most of the 256GB storage space and had a black default console for the icon. For a moment, I weighed up the pros and cons of it being a virus, but eventually gave in to curiosity and opened it. At first, nothing happened. Then, a small window popped open and text scrolled across the screen. "May your wealth be writ upon your flesh," it read. "Let us see what you are made of. Remaining funds, £128. To withdraw, please enter account number." I don't know why, but something about it struck me as odd. I got the weird sense it was being written live, the way the letters had been typed out on screen one by one. I wondered if it was some dodgy dark web thing, and the whole WritCoin name made me think of cryptocurrency. At first, I laughed at the idea of entering my account number, thinking it was a scam. But then I remembered, I didn't have a penny to my name and my credit score was in the gutter. If anyone wanted to steal my identity, they were welcome to it. And what with all those stories of people making so much money off crypto, I figured, what the hell, and plugged my details in. Sure enough, I checked a few minutes later, and £128 had been deposited into my account. I laughed, because despite the windfall, it all just went into paying off my unplanned overdraft. But still, I thought, money is money. Before noticing that the program had updated itself. Now the screen read, remaining funds, £0. Let's see what you are made of. Something about those words didn't feel like a dare or even a challenge, but more like an overt threat. It was the kind of thing I would picture Jeffrey Dahmer saying as he approached the victim. Thinking about it, I wound up getting so nervous I bit my lip hard enough to draw blood. Ow! I hissed, before wiping the little nick on the inner skin of my lip and staring at a trickle of crimson on my thumb. When I looked back up at the computer a moment later, I saw that something else had been written while I wasn't looking. A little taste. Remaining funds, £5. Oh, I muttered quietly, feeling the cogs turning around in my head. It must just keep generating cash over time. The only thing was, I didn't know if this thing would make £5 or £5 a day, or what. So I decided to put the idea of winning the lottery out of my head, so I could get to sleep and a little peace. That morning, I awoke and forgot all about WritCoin, instead going to work like I normally would. Even when I returned home, I still didn't remember the program and went straight into a Skype call with my son. Most of it was like normal, I guess. He didn't have much interest in me, but I tried hard to show an interest in him. Apparently, he was doing a race in the week for some kind of charity, and him and the other kids would all get to dress up. It made me laugh, and I asked if he'd like me to come, but he shook my head. "Can you help though, Daddy?" he asked. "Help how?" "The children in need money. They don't have clean water or clean clothes, and Mrs. Rottle says most of them don't even have an Xbox." "Oh?" I nodded. How much do you think I should give? I guess I could give £1 or £2. That's how much we gave when I was a kid." "Tommy's dad gave £50, he said, and I noticed how he was looking at his hands and not me. I remember that look of disappointment. It was how I looked to my parents when I was his age. "I'll figure it out," I said. "It's only right to help people in need." "Is that your father?" his mother asked as she passed, a load of laundry in her arms. I took a deep breath to steady myself while she spoke to my son. "2 minutes, sunshine. I just need to speak with him real quick," she said. "Why don't you go pop your pajamas on, and Mummy will be with you in a minute." Her profile appeared on screen as she took the phone away from him. "Hi, Craig," she said. "Look, I want to speak with you because there's a school field trip coming up." "Oh?" "Yeah," she said. "I know it's not ideal, but I think I can cover it by myself." "Where's he going?" I asked. "It's skiing, in France. It's optional, of course, but some of the other kids have noticed that, well, his clothes aren't as nice, and his phone's a little older, and—" "I know," I nodded. "It's tough." "Yeah, which is why I think it's important he goes on this trip. I don't want him to miss out on nice stuff just because of money, not like we had to growing up. So, I'm going to start saving already, but ideally, I could use a little of your help with this." "How much?" "I'd say £400. "Jesus Christ," I groaned, momentarily burying my face in my hands. "What is this school doing? A day out to a theme park used to be good enough for us." "It's voluntary," she hissed. "If you're going to be a dick about it, I'll just tell him you said he can't go." "No, don't do that," I grimaced. Just give me a few days and I'll see what I can do. Can you put him back on?" "I just sent him to bed," she said, sounding awfully indignant. "We were speaking. I didn't even say goodnight. I hardly ever see him." "Jesus Christ, Craig. He's going down for the night. Do you want me to go wake him up just so you can feel like a real—" I hung up there and then, ending the call and feeling my skin momentarily flush red with anger. After a few steady breaths, I returned to my laptop. the memory of WritCoin suddenly large in my mind. Eagerly, I waited for my laptop to wake up while I foolishly let my head run away with thoughts of having it make me thousands and thousands of pounds. Remaining funds, £5, it flashed. Damn it! I screamed in anger, slamming my hand down onto the desk. So much for the goddamn money tree. What a thumping good time, the screen flashed, each letter appearing with great deliberacy. Remaining funds, £25. I sat there for a moment, soothing the underside of my fist, wondering what the hell it meant. My laptop didn't even have a webcam, so it wasn't like some hacker could see me. For a moment, I told myself it was a coincidence. But I couldn't stop myself driving my thumbnail into my palm in a bid to calm my thoughts. Even as I did so, the screen updated. Hardly a deep impression. Remaining funds, £25 and 5 pence. Oh my god, I muttered, and like a light bulb going off, it hit me. I slammed my hand back down onto the table, immediately regretting it when the now bruised flesh struck wood for a second time. I cried out louder than before and cradled my throbbing hand while the screen updated again. Let's avoid repetition. May your wealth be writ upon your flesh. Let us see what you are made of. Remaining funds, £30 and 5 pence. Okay, I muttered, speaking to myself, and then, without thinking, I started muttering, 400, 400, 400, 400. I took my other hand and went to hit the table once more when I took further notice of the warning. Let's avoid repetition, it had read. Something about it made me nervous, and I started looking around the room for other ideas. 400, I muttered, again and again as I scanned the empty takeaway boxes and piles of dirty laundry. I so desperately needed the money, and I couldn't stop myself thinking of whether I could use the program to make thousands, maybe even tens of hundreds of thousands, so that I could escape my hellhole flat. But nothing was forthcoming, so I returned to the table and did the next thing that came to my mind. I headbutted it. But, like an idiot, I wound up half hesitating at the last moment, which just meant I sort of lifted my face up a little bit before inertia carried my skull the rest of the way down. In one swift move, I avoided slamming my forehead onto the table, and instead slammed my face into it. Ah, Christ, I groaned, immediately craning my smashed nose. My mouth filled with the acrid and metallic taste of blood, and already I could feel one of my lips starting to swell. The whole thing had hurt about 10 times more than I imagined, and I worried if I'd end up walking around for weeks looking like I'd been mugged. But at the same time, I couldn't stop myself from taking a peek at the laptop screen. Face up to the challenge. Remaining funds, £140, 5 pence. For the rest of the night, I stayed up wondering about the rules of this little game. I wondered if I could put a thumbtack in my shoe and just slowly accumulate pennies throughout the day. I wondered if it paid more for blood, pain, or just injury. What about disease? Thing is, it's hard to injure yourself in constantly new ways. I tried a few other little things, jabbing myself with a fork, kicking the chair leg to stub my toe, and found that this thing hated repetition. I needed to keep it new and fresh. I even nicked myself with a small razor with the bathroom door shut, and found it still, somehow, knew what I was doing. It only earned me a £5, but every little helps, right? It took me another 3 days to get the £400 I needed, and it was a painful few days. I didn't want to do anything that would be permanent, so I took my time, thinking of what to do, and while I absolutely hated it, messing around with knives and needles seemed to be the best bet. Anything that dealt with soft flesh worked well, because I had plenty of spots to choose from, and I figured it'd heal easier over time. Ultimately, I wanted to avoid another broken nose, since not only did it make me look like an idiot, whose excuses never sounded quite right, but also, it bloody hurt. For a long, long time afterwards, the whole of my face throbbed like an open sore. At least when I pushed the safety pin through the flesh between my thumb and forefinger. It hurt, but it wasn't too bad, you know. Plus the damn WritCoin went crazy. £100 just for that. A day later, and aside from some swelling and general soreness, all you could see was a tiny little prick on either side of the skin. Little cuts across the surface of my skin helped too. I could definitely tell that this thing had preference for blood and anything sharp. And by the end of the first week, not only had I cashed in enough money to send my kid on that skiing trip, but I'd banked an extra £1,200 on top. That wasn't enough to pay off my overdraft and get myself back to square one. I knew it'd take a few months before I had any chance of getting my credit score up. But who cared? So long as I paced myself, I had a practically limitless source of cash. I even tried posting on a few online boards to see if anyone knew about WritCoin, but nobody did. I was hoping that maybe someone out there knew about the specific rules. Figured that if anyone could game the system, it'd be some smart bugger on the internet. But no one knew what I was on about, and one or two people DM'd me offering me links and different resources to help with self-harm and mental illness. The only time someone offered any real help was when some guy told me to look up Derek Little. Apparently, this guy was some anti-capitalist anarchist or, well, you know, some political position with a lot of dashes. The gist of it though was that he was a proponent of using decentralized currency to upset mainstream government. He saw himself as some kind of revolutionary. There were only one or two lines about him on various websites, usually citing him as a kind of offhand source. All in all, there was very little about his life. Most of what I saw was actually focused on his death. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but there was a weird popular copypasta about a cop who found Derek dead in his apartment after receiving complaints about the smell. It was posted all over various chans along with the same few grainy pictures. The images were, well, they were shock porn, I think. You know, like those websites you share with other kids when you were 14 for a laugh. Waffles of a certain colour, citrus-based parties, etc, etc. I mean, I have to assume that's what they were because, well, if you saw it, you'd understand. Apparently, this cop walked in on this half-rotten corpse only to realise that the victim had been going at their whole body with a potato peeler, leaving bits of themselves floating around in the water like some kind of punch bowl. Original description said Derek had weighed 300 pounds before his death, but when the coroner had weighed him, he had cut about 190 pounds away, slither by wafer-thin slither, all of which had to be bagged up and put aside. Anyway, the final twist of the story was that the corpse later went missing. It all sounded like BS to me. Even if I did know next to nothing about cryptocurrency, I still couldn't figure out how the hell it connected to WritCoin. Sure, even at the time, I found looking at the slimy red-faced figure huddled in the bathtub, cradling their own legs like a fetus, gave me an uncomfortable pang in my chest. But I didn't want to think about it. Not really, even as the various wounds on my hands and arms started to throb in sympathy at the raw, glistening sight of his exposed flesh. I ignored the anxiety and exited the window, and told myself that, whatever else happened, I was still in control of my actions, and I could easily get the better of whatever hell this thing was. So, I kept at it for another week or so, even when some of my cuts started to get infected. I noticed that, at the very least, the WritCoin account started making me a few pounds for each hour I was unwell. I guess the problem was, I started to run out of room. Or rather, I'd gotten a little unimaginative and started letting some of the scars bunch up. By the time I realised it, I was too late. Infection had already set in and my inner palm looked like the pitted flesh of a pomegranate. God damn, it hurt like hell too. Every inch of my skin felt too tight or too cold. It was like my flesh was poisoned, like I could feel something rancid living in the blood that moved around with every heartbeat. On top of that, I started shaking all the time and ended up with one hell of a fever. I still don't know if WritCoin paid out for being diseased or in pain, but to me, all that mattered was that it paid. You see, I'd gotten a figure in my head. It wasn't going to revolutionize anything, but if I got enough cash, I could move out to my flat and live closer to my kid. I stopped withdrawing money out of WritCoin and let it build up instead, which was just as well really, since by the end, my fingers were so swollen I could barely even type. But I guessed I could just figure that out when it came to it. Even the pain had started to wane a little. I think it was because I started to associate it with the payout, maybe. I can't say. Looking back, I did some messed up stuff to myself. The worst was when I noticed my hand was so thick and fat, it looked poppable, for want of a better word. So, I took this sewing needle, laid it out vertically in my palm so it was pointed between my two middle fingers. Gently, I cupped it enough so that each end started to dig into flesh at the base and top of my palm. I stayed there for a while, just gently squeezing and relaxing my hand, needling away at the flesh until blood as thick as honey trickled down my wrist. And then I clenched, almost mesmerized by the way the needle, buttressed by the bones at the base of my wrist, was thrust through the flesh between my two knuckles. It felt like a hot lance was jammed into my hand, the pain roaring upwards through my arm and even into my chest. But I laughed. Good grip, the screen flashed. Now we're seeing what you're made of. Remaining funds, £6,703.25. After that, I collapsed, only to later awaken in an almost fever-drunk state, just so I could pull the needle out, wincing as the smooth metal slid out of my flesh in one long, slow motion. I remember thinking that I'd let the stress get the better of me. Maybe the endless payments, the fact I couldn't go to work, which meant I had to make up for the lost income in other ways, and the endless cycle of infection and cutting. I wound up bedbound, watching the WritCoin trickling upwards while I dipped in and out of strange dreams. Over time, the days started to blur until I felt like it was one horrible nightmare, one where that red-faced man from the picture was sitting at the foot of my bed, dripping effluent onto my carpet. In my dream, all I could care about was that he was making a mess, and I tried desperately to get up. But if I moved, he'd just put a hand on my ankle, and it'd paralyze me with fear. God, I can still see it now. That slick, slippery cold hand that felt like someone had put a raw chicken breast on my ankle. But the mere presence of it stopped me from being able to blink. He had total power over me, and it terrified me, and I couldn't stop my eyes tracing the messed up patterns carved into his arms and his chest. The way he looked at me, it was like he was disappointed. He looked so sad, so angry, like a parent who couldn't quite get to grips with the kid they'd birthed. I don't know why, but I got it into my feverish head that he was going to eat me, that he was going to tear me open and start pulling away and guzzling down my blood and tearing his ivory teeth into my flesh, all so that he could see what I'm made of, I cried, startling myself awake. My bedsheets were soaked, not just in sweat, but blood and pus. The smell coming off me was sweet and rancid, like rotting apples in a dumpster. Before I even knew it, I was retching and flung myself halfway out of my bed so I could vomit in the nearby wastebasket. Jesus, I felt like a ton of bricks had landed on me, but at least my temperature felt normal and my head was clear. Looking at my arms and hands, I saw the skin was scarred and wounded, but where once it had been pallid, almost bluish as it shimmered under a constant patina of sweat and infection, it was now a healthy pink. Scars were starting to flake away. The itch had gone. After that, I stuck my head under the nearest tap and drank until I felt like I was going to be sick. That was one of the best feelings of my entire life. Just the cooling water running down my throat and my chin, washing away the feeling of filth and crust. I needed it so damn bad. Stumbling back into my room afterwards, I felt like I'd been given a reprieve, and it was with great anxiety and uncertainty that I pulled away the bedsheets and threw them into the nearby bin. I had to ignore the strange striated pattern of rust-brown marks close to the foot of the bed. It looked an awful lot like the fingers of a hand had been laid over the quilt, and the mere sight of it made me feel ill again, like the fever was returning. When I finally brought myself to the laptop, I saw the final balance. Now your sins are writ upon your flesh. We finally know what you are made of. Remaining funds, £9,756.34. I entered my account balance and withdrew it all. Before I finally quit, the screen updated once more. All done. Your final score? £14,813.42. High score? £2,014,392.42. Not even close. Try again. Let your sins be writ upon your... I closed the lid and then binned the stick, not even throwing it out into the wild. Instead, I formatted it, then chucked it right into the garbage. And, although I had a burning suspicion the formatting wouldn't do much, I at least hoped it might end up at the bottom of a garbage dump somewhere, buried beneath tons of trash and metal. At least, that's what I hoped. Lately, I can't help but notice passing stories of the mentally ill and deranged. No one else could possibly recognize the signs like I do. I guess my fever gave me a lucky break. It stopped me doing it long enough that I got a clear head. Sometimes I still wonder about that high score, about how the hell anyone could have managed it and lived to tell the tale. But then again, none of the others I see online live very long. Like I said, anyone else just writes it off as someone going loony. But I can tell the difference. That thing, it must travel somehow. Last case I heard was a guy in Germany who stuck his fingers into a mechanical pencil sharpener. But the one that really broke me was the bloke who worked at the tip, a few dozen miles away. I think it's because I knew he must have been the next in the chain right after me. I feel more responsible for him than anyone else. Deep down, I know I should have kept the stick, but the temptation was just too much. The last thing the guy said to anyone before peeling away chunks of his belly fat with a piece of rusted metal was, "Let's see what I'm made of."